And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy, in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story of gaslight and shadows, of velvet curtains and cold stone. The story of a city of light, just before the shadows begin to fall. A story about Paris. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint on the lamplit boulevards of this channel before you continue your journey inward. And as you do, perhaps you could let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your quiet corner of the world. It's a nice thought, knowing we're all here in this moment together, but scattered across the night. All right, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing, a quiet hum like the murmur of the gas in the street lamps just outside a Parisian window. And together, let's allow the story to begin. The year is 1870th. The month is August. And you are in Paris. Breathe in. The air doesn't carry the scent of fear, not yet. It smells of coal smoke, of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor's cart, and of the sweet, irresistible perfume of a nearby pâtissier. It smells of progress. You're standing on one of the new, grand boulevards, a vast, open artery carved through the heart of the old medieval city. This is the work of Baron Haussmann, the emperor's master city planner. For nearly 2 decades, he has been demolishing the tangled, narrow streets of old Paris and replacing them with these magnificent, tree-lined avenues. They are beautiful, of course. They let light and air into the city center. They also, not so coincidentally, make it exceptionally difficult to build barricades and remarkably easy to move troops, a lesson learned from past revolutions. You are living in the capital of the world, the center of civilization. The Second French Empire, under Napoleon III, feels permanent, glorious. You can wander into a brand new department store, a palace of commerce like Le Bon Marché, and marvel at goods from all over the world, stacked high under a soaring iron and glass roof. The city is a spectacle, a constant performance of its own greatness. You take a seat at a small round table outside a cafe. The wicker chair creaks slightly as you settle in. Around you is the gentle hum of the city, the clatter of iron-shod hooves on cobblestone as horse-drawn omnibuses ferry passengers across town, the murmur of conversations in French, the clinking of glasses and silverware. It is the sound of a city utterly at peace with itself, utterly confident in its place at the top of the world. As you sip your coffee, you might notice one of the city's peculiar new pieces of street furniture. It's an ornate, dark green, cylindrical structure made of cast iron. A public urinal, or pissoir. They are a strangely elegant solution to a very practical problem and have become an iconic, if slightly odd, part of the Parisian streetscape. Men duck in and out of them, and their presence is just another sign of the city's organized, modern, and civic-minded nature. Everything has its place in Haussmann's Paris. You pick up a newspaper left on the table. The headlines are full of bold pronouncements about Prussia, the German kingdom to the east. There has been a diplomatic incident, something about a vacant throne in Spain. It all seems very far away. Your neighbors, the Prussians, are spoken of with a kind of dismissive arrogance. Their leader, Bismarck, is a brute, a provincial strongman. Their king is a puppet. Their army is nothing compared to the glory and dealing of the French soldier, which just began a few weeks ago, is expected to be a short, triumphant affair. Our boys will be in Berlin by autumn. Historians still argue about the spark that lit this fuse. They debate whether it was the inevitable result of Bismarck's grand design to unite Germany through blood and iron, or simply a tragic series of diplomatic pride and foolish miscalculations on both sides. But for you, sitting here, that debate is for the future. For now it is just distant thunder, a topic for confident cafe chatter. The real, tangible world is the warm cup in your hands, the stylish people strolling past, railing past relic, the feeling of unshakable permanence. As dusk begins to settle, a lamplighter makes his way down the boulevard, touching his long pole to the gas lamps one by one. They hiss to life, casting a warm, golden, slightly ethereal glow on the pavement. The light is soft, romantic. It makes the city look like a dream. In this light, under these lamps, the idea of defeat, of suffering, of starvation, it isn't just improbable. It is unthinkable. It is unthinkable. It is unthinkable. Not in the city of light. You feel a subtle shift in the air, a change in the city's gentle hum. It's barely perceptible at first, like the moment the string section in an orchestra tunes down half a note, creating a quiet, unnoticed dissonance. The confident chatter in the cafes has stopped, but it's strained. The newspaper headlines have grown larger. The ink somehow blacker, more urgent. It is now early September. The news from the front is not the triumphant march you were promised. Reports are confused, contradictory. There was a battle, a big one, near a town called Sedan. Then the rumors solidify into a shocking, indigestible fact. The French army, the pride of the empire, has been defeated. Not just defeated, annihilated. And worse, the emperor himself, Napoleon II, is a prisoner of war. The entire regime that had defined Paris for 20 years evaporates in a single afternoon. The Second Empire is gone. In its place, a hastily assembled government of national defense declares the birth of the Third Republic. The city is a whirlwind of confusion, shock, and a strange shock. Defiant patriotism. The empire may have failed, but Paris will not. France will not. You stand in a crowd watching as the golden imperial eagles are pried off the public buildings, tossed down to the street to the cheers of the people. But this revolutionary fervor is laced with a new kind of anxiety. The Prussian army and their German allies are now marching unopposed. And they are marching unopposed. The city, which just weeks ago felt like the open and beating heart of the world, now begins to feel like a trap. You see the preparations everywhere. The grand new boulevards are suddenly filled with soldiers not parading but digging. Trenches are being cut into the pristine parks. The beautiful trees lining the avenues are being felled, their wood intended for fortifications and firewood. The vast park on the western edge of the city where fashionable parade in their carriages is now filled with a bleating, mooing, sprawling herd of livestock. Thousands of sheep and cattle have been driven into the city from the surrounding countryside, a living larder for the siege everyone now knows is coming. They graze awkwardly among the manicured lawns and ornamental gardens, a surreal and unsettling sight. You watch as the great city gates, the ports, are fortified. Stones are piled up, cannons are rolled into place. The flow of goods into Paris, the lifeblood of the city, slows to a trickle and then stops. On the morning of September 19th, you hear that the last telegraph wire leading out of the city has been cut. The last railway line is in enemy hands. You are now one of nearly 2 million people. Citizens, soldiers, refugees from the countryside, sealed inside a fortress. The German armies have surrounded you completely. There is no way in and no way out. It's a strange and quiet feeling. The daily rumble of supply carts and trains, a sound so constant you never even noticed it, is gone. The silence it leaves behind is unnerving. For the first few days, there is an almost festive atmosphere of defiance. The city is a grand island, standing alone against the barbarian hordes. The National Guard, a citizen militia, drills in the public squares with a mix of genuine courage and comical ineptitude. Many of them in brand new uniforms that don't quite fit, armed with old muskets. Here's a curious little detail from that moment of hopeful bravado. A new kind of business springs up. Photographers begin selling cartes de visite, small photographic portraits of citizens posing in their National Guard uniforms. Men who had never held a rifle in their lives now have a memento of themselves as heroic defenders of the city, a portrait they can send to their sweethearts. Historians see these little cards as a poignant symbol of the city's initial, naive misunderstanding of the reality of modern warfare. The belief that spirit and a fine uniform could somehow defeat hardened troops and heavy artillery. You walk to the city ramparts, the massive ring of walls and forts built decades earlier. From here you can see it, not the army itself, which is mostly hidden behind hills and in woodlands, but the signs of it. The smoke from their campfires forms a faint, hazy circle on the horizon, a constant reminder that you are being watched, contained. It is a deeply claustrophobic feeling. Paris, the city that prided itself on being the most cosmopolitan, the most open city in the world, is now a cage. A very large, very beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. And as you stand there, looking out at the silent, patient enemy, a cold question begins to form in the back of your mind. You look at the herds in the parks, you think of the granaries, and you wonder just how much food is actually in this cage with you. But the human mind, and especially the Parisian mind, has a remarkable defense against fear, a cocktail of bravado, irony, and unwavering self-belief. The chilling realization that the city is a cage is quickly papered over with vibrant, patriotic posters that seem to appear on every wall overnight. They are beautifully printed, with heroic figures in bold, swooping typography, proclaiming glory for the Republican, doom for the invaders. The new leader of the government and the military governor of Paris is a man named General Trochu. And General Trochu, everyone says, has a plan. He announces it publicly, a three-part strategy that will save the city. It's a bit vague, but it sounds impressive. He assures the citizens that he will never, under any circumstances, surrender. This phrase, "the governor of Paris will not capitulate," becomes a famous and defiant cry. You hear it repeated in the streets and the cafes, a kind of mantra against the encroaching silence. The city breathes a collective sigh of relief. There is a plan. The general has said so. And so, Paris settles into a strange new routine, a period of waiting. A period of waiting. The days are punctuated by the sounds of bugle calls and the marching of the National Guard. They drill endlessly in the squares and parks, their bayonets glinting in the autumn sun. You watch them, a citizen army of 300,000 men, and you feel a surge of pride. This is the city in arms. But you also can't help but notice the details. The way they hold their rifles awkwardly, the way their lines waver, the way their officers, often elected by the men themselves, seem to be reading their commands from a little book. This strange mix of patriotism and improvisation gives rise to some truly bizarre projects. In one part of the city, foundries that once made decorative iron railings are now attempting to cast their own cannons. They call it a popular subscription. Citizens donate metal, anything they have. Bronze statues of past kings, old church bells, even zinc from bar tops are melted down. One particularly enthusiastic inventor claims he can make a cannon out of wood, tightly bound with iron wire. The resulting weapons are often more dangerous to their operators than to the enemy, but the psychological effect is immense. It feels like everyone is doing something. Historians look back on this do-it-yourself artillery effort as a perfect metaphor for the early siege, a tremendous amount of energy and spirit, with very little practical result. Meanwhile, the professional soldiers of the regular army are preparing for the real fight. The plan as it begins to unfold is to launch a series of breakouts or sorties. The idea is to punch a hole through the German lines and link up with another French army that is supposedly being formed somewhere down south in the Loire Valley. The first of these attempts is launched at the end of October. You wake one morning to a new sound, a deep, continuous, chest-thrumming roar from the south of the city. It's the sound of your own forts firing, a conversation of heavy artillery. All of Paris seems to hold its breath. Troops march out through the southern gates, looking determined, their flags flying. For a full day, the city is a hive of rumor and speculation. Newsboys run through the streets shouting snippets of unconfirmed victories. People gather in anxious clumps, their ears cocked to the south, trying to interpret the changing rhythm of the cannons. Then, the next day, the guns fall silent, and the troops come back. They don't march back, they trickle back. In small groups, tired, muddy, and empty-eyed. The wounded are brought in on carts. There is no victory parade. There is no announcement from the government, just a quiet, official notice posted with a list of casualties. The sortie has failed. And here the character of General Trochu becomes a subject of intense debate that continues to this day. Was he, as his critics later claimed, a defeatist from the very beginning? Did he launch these attacks knowing they would fail, simply to show the hot-headed politicians and the public that resistance was futile? Or was he a realist, a pragmatist trapped in an impossible situation, doing the best he could with a demoralized army against a superior foe. Standing on the street watching the broken soldiers return, don't have the luxury of historical perspective. You only feel the first cold drop of doubt. The confident proclamations on the posters begin to look a little brittle. The defiant cries of "no surrender" sound a little thinner. The autumn air is growing colder, carrying with it a damp chill that seems to seep into the very stones of the city. The great, living larder of sheep and cattle that was herded into the parks is visibly shrinking. And the short, glorious war you were promised is starting to feel very, very long. The city is still defiant, but it is also beginning to feel truly hungry. The hunger doesn't arrive like a sudden clap of thunder. It seeps in, a slow rising tide of quiet desperation. At first it's just an inconvenience, a topic for dark jokes. The government, in a show of decisive action, introduces rationing. You are issued a small card, a card de-alimentation, which entitles you to a daily portion of meat and bread. The system feels organized, fair, a sensible precaution for a short siege. Your first trip to the local boucher under the new system is an odd experience. The butcher, a man you've known for years who used to greet you with a booming voice and a wide, flour-dusted smile, is now subdued, almost grim. He no longer presents his wares with a flourish. He simply takes your card, stamps it with an inky flourish, and hands you a small, neatly wrapped parcel. Inside, the portion of beef or lamb seems impossibly small, a pale shadow of what you're used to. But within a few weeks, the nature of that meat begins to change. The familiar cuts of steak, roast, and chop disappear entirely. The government has requisitioned all the cattle and sheep that were grazing in the parks. They are being slaughtered systematically, their meat distributed through the municipal butcher shops. The problem is, there were far fewer of them than anyone had hoped, and 2 million people eat a lot of meat. You stand in line for hours now, a queue that snakes down the street, shuffling forward a few inches at a time. The mood in the line is a mixture of grim patience and simmering resentment. People exchange rumors, fragments of news, and most importantly recipes. Not for fancy dishes, but for how to make a tiny piece of sinewy beef last for 3 days. How to boil a bone until it gives up every last whisper of flavor. Then, one day you reach the front of the line, present your card, and the butcher hands you a parcel that feels different. The meat inside is dark, almost purplish, and has a strange, coarse grain. "What is this?" you ask. He just shrugs, not meeting your eye. "It's meat," he says. You take it home, and when you cook it, it has a sweetish, unfamiliar taste. It's horse. The initial revulsion is profound. Parisians who prided themselves on their sophisticated palates considered eating horse meat to be barbaric, something only the desperately poor or the truly uncivilized would do. Yet, here it is, the official ration, served on your plate. It becomes the great, unspoken secret of the city. Everyone is eating it, but no one wants to talk about it. It feels like a line has been crossed, a small but significant surrender to the seed. A strange bit of trivia from this period is the birth of what would become known as hip-hop hagi, the practice of eating horse meat. While it was born of desperation, some chefs in the city tried to elevate it, to make it fashionable. They founded a society to promote its culinary virtues, publishing pamphlets with elegant recipes for filet de chevalandes, AUCIS Sunday cheval. It was a classic Parisian response to a crisis. If you are forced to do something horrifying, pretend you chose to do it, and then turn it into a form of art. For most people, though, it was no art. It was a greasy, tough, and constant reminder of how far their world had shrunk. As October turns to November, even the horse meat becomes scarce. The queues get longer, the rations smaller. The butcher shops that once displayed whole carcasses hanging from gleaming hooks now have nothing to show but bare marble slabs, wiped clean. A new kind of sign starts to appear in their windows, ferme faute de marchandises, closed for lack of goods. You walk past these empty shops, and the sight is more chilling than any Prussian cannon. A butcher shop without meat is a profound violation of the natural order of things in Paris. It's like a library without books or a church without a bell. The central, Life-giving institutions of your neighborhood are shutting down. One by one, the baker still has bread for now, but the loaves are getting smaller and have a strange grayish color. The grocer has a few withered vegetables left, but he charges astronomical prices for them. The city's great food markets, like the famous Les Halles, the belly of Paris, are becoming ghost towns. The vast pavilions of iron and glass, which should be overflowing with produce from all corners of France, are cavernous and empty. A few hardy vendors sell cabbages grown in the public parks, or mushrooms cultivated in the city's catacombs, but that's all. The tide of hunger is no longer just seeping in, it's rising fast. And as you walk home, your stomach crumbling with a hollow ache, you start to look at the city differently. You start to notice other sources of food. You see a plump stray cat darting into an alleyway. And for the first time, a thought crosses your mind that makes you feel deeply, deeply ashamed. The decision to consume the horses is a public one, a grimly logical step managed by the authorities. It's a sad affair, but an organized one. You see the magnificent Percheroness that pulled the heavy beer drays, the sleek thoroughbreds that once belonged to the emperor's personal stables, all led away to the municipal abattoirs. Their sacrifice is seen as a patriotic duty to the defense of Paris, but what comes next happens not by official decree, but in the shadows, in the whispers between hungry neighbors. It unfolds in the quiet, desperate corners of the city. The horses vanish from the streets first. The rhythmic clop-clop of hooves, the signature sound of 19th century urban life, fades into an eerie silence. Paris becomes a walking city. The grand omnibuses sit idle in their depots. The elegant carriages of the wealthy are locked away in their stables, now empty. The only wheels that turn are those of military wagons, now pulled by sweating lines of men. The silence of the horses is the first layer of the city's normal soundscape to be peeled away, revealing the stark quiet of the siege beneath. Then, you begin to notice the absence of other animals. The dogs, for instance. Paris was a city of dogs. Every concierge had a yapping terrier. Every lady of fashion a pampered lapdog, every rag-and-bone man a scruffy mongrel trotting faithfully behind his cart. Suddenly they are gone. There are no public announcements, no government rations of dog meat. Their disappearance is a private tragedy repeated in thousands of homes. You hear stories. A neighbor confides in a hushed, tearful voice that their little dog, Fifi, just ran away. They don't meet your eyes when they say it. Everyone understands what this means. To eat a pet, an animal you have named and cared for, is a profound psychological threshold to cross. It is a violation of the bond between humans and the animals they bring into their homes. And yet, hunger is a powerful, unsentimental force. Soon the shame begins to erode, replaced by a grim pragmatism. Butcher shops that had closed for lack of beef or horse suddenly reopen with a new, discreet sign in the window. The sign might simply say canine or feline, and on the marble slab inside, you might see the small, unnerving, familiar carcasses of dogs and cats, skinned and prepared for sale. The prices are exorbitant. A good-sized cat, you learn, can sell for as much as 20 francs, a huge sum for a working family. They are given euphemistic names on the menu. Cat is called roof rabbit. Dog is referred to as sheep of the wood, mouton des bois. This dark trade gives rise to its own morbid folklore. People whisper about the best way to cook a cat, a long stew, apparently, with plenty of onions, if you can find them. They debate the flavor of different breeds of dog. A butcher in one neighborhood becomes famous for his dog ham. Historians still find this period difficult to document with precision, as so much of it was unofficial, conducted in a grey market of shame and necessity. While menus and official records tell us about the horses and zoo animals, the story of the pets is written in the private diaries and letters of grieving owners, a hidden history of quiet, personal horror. One particularly strange account that survives from this time is that of a man who owned a parrot. The bird was a beloved family pet, famous for its ability to mimic phrases and squawk revolutionary slogans. As the family's hunger grew more desperate, the inevitable decision was made. The saddest part of the story, as the owner later recounted, was that as he was preparing the bird for the pot, its last words were, "Oh, you villain, Whether this is true or a piece of grim, embellished folklore is impossible to say, but it captures the surreal and tragic absurdity of the moment. You walk through your neighborhood, and the silence is what strikes you most. No barking, no meowing. The city's animal chorus has been silenced. Even the pigeons, the famously plump pigeons of Paris, have become scarce, hunted relentlessly with nets and makeshift traps. The only animals you see with any regularity now are the rats. They scurry along the gutters, growing bolder as the human population grows weaker. And you look at them, these sleek, dark creatures of the sewer, and you no longer feel the immediate revulsion you once did. Instead, a new, colder, more calculating thought begins to form in your mind. The transition from seeing a rat as vermin to seeing it as a viable source of protein is a journey into a new level of desperation. It begins, as these things so often do, as a joke, a grim piece of gallows, humor whispered in the bread queues. Did you hear? The rats are petitioning the government for their own ration cards. Or I saw two rats fighting over a critic. But behind the laughter, a cold calculus is at work. The city is teeming with them. With the cats, their natural predators, gone, the rat population has exploded. They are a constant, unwelcome presence, a symbol of filth and disease. But they are also meat. They are warm-blooded. They are, in a purely biological sense, edible. The psychological barrier is immense, far greater than it was for the horse. A horse is a noble animal. A dog or a cat is a companion. A rat is a creature of the sewer, the embodiment of everything unclean. The first people to cross this line are the truly destitute, the ones who were already living on the margins of society before the siege began. For them the choice is simple, eat a rat or eat nothing at all. They hunt them in the sewers, in the cellars, along the banks of the Seine. They become the city's new trappers, their grim trade conducted at night. Then you see the evidence appear in the public markets. At first it's discreet. A man with a sack at the edge of the market, selling them to those who dare to ask. But soon, the shame evaporates, replaced by the sheer force of supply and demand. A butcher, his shop long empty of any conventional meat, clears his marble slab and arranges his new product. Skinned rats, trussed with string like tiny chickens, laid out in neat rows. A price is scrawled on a slate, 2 francs per rat. The city's entrepreneurs, never missing an opportunity, begin to glamorize it. A famous chef, the proprietor of a well-known restaurant on the left bank, decides to make a statement. He puts a new item on his menu, written in elegant cursive on a calcboard outside his door. Sommes des rats à la Robert. Rats too in a classic French sauce. It becomes a sensation, a morbid curiosity for those who can still afford to dine out. The act of eating a rat is transformed from a sign of utter destitution into a strange, patriotic, almost fashionable act of defiance. We will eat anything before we surrender to the Prussians, is the sentiment. This is a recurring theme that historians find fascinating about the siege. The Parisian ability to aesthetize horror, to apply the rules of gastronomy to the unspeakable. There are serious debates in newspapers about the best way to prepare rat. Some swear by grilling them over open coals like sausages. Others insist on a rich to tenderize the meat. One popular recipe involves skinning the rat, stuffing it with a forcemeat of breadcrumbs and what little herbs you can find, and then roasting it. A particularly strange detail from this period comes from the diaries of a Parisian intellectual. He describes a rat hunting party he attended in the cellars of a large apartment building. It was treated as a sport, a grotesque parody of a country hunt. Well-dressed men, armed with sticks and accompanied by the few remaining terriers who were too fierce or too clever to have been eaten themselves, would corner and kill the rat. The bounty would then be taken upstairs to the kitchen and prepared for a grand feast. It's a chilling image, a society turning its own decay into a form of entertainment. You, however, are not attending any rat hunting parties. For you, the decision is a solitary one, made in the cold quiet of your own kitchen. You buy one. You carry it home in a plain paper wrapping, feeling the judgmental stares of your neighbors. though they are likely doing the same. The preparation is an ordeal. You have to overcome a deep primal revulsion. But hunger is a louder voice than disgust. You cook it, you add a splash of wine if you have any left, a wilted carrot, a single precious onion, and you eat it. The taste is not as bad as you feared. It's game why, a bit like squirrel or rabbit. But that's not the point. The taste is irrelevant. What matters is the act itself. With each bite, you feel another layer of your old self being stripped away. The person you were in August, sitting at that cafe, worrying about politics and the quality of the coffee. That person is a stranger to you now. That person would have raged at the very thought of this. But you are no longer that person. The siege is not just emptying the city's larderess, it is emptying you of your old certainties, your old sensibilities, leaving a hollow space that is filled with one single, overwhelming thought, the simple, desperate need for your next meal. The city has now sorted itself into two distinct worlds, running on parallel tracks of hunger. There is your world, the world of the ration card, the endless queues, the grim calculus of dog, cat, and rat. And then there is another world, a world that exists behind the heavy velvet curtains and frosted glass of the city's finest restaurants. This is the world of the rich man's hunger. It's a strange paradox. While you are struggling to make us to from sewer vermin, the Parisian tradition of haute cuisine, of fine dining, does not die. It adapts. It adapts. It metastasizes into something bizarre, a grotesque parody of its former self. The wealthy of Paris, the industrialists, the foreign diplomats who were racked by the siege, are not starving. They are simply bored. They have money, but money can no longer buy a simple loaf of bread or a cut of beef. It buys experience. You walk down the grand boulevards at night, through a city that is darker and quieter than you've ever known it. Most windows are black, the inhabitants conserving fuel and huddled together for warmth. But here and there a restaurant window still glows with a warm, inviting light. You can hear the faint sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses from within. If you stand close enough, you can see the silhouettes of diners at tables draped in white linen, attended by waiters in crisp uniforms. A typical dinner at Vaux in December 1870 might start with a soup, a consommé made from horse broth, perhaps flavored with the lust of the garden herbs. The fish course is of course absent. There are no fish in the Seine anymore. Instead, you might be offered fried gudgeons, the tiny freshwater fish that were netted until the river was empty, or perhaps even something more exotic, like salamanders from a rich man's private pond. But the main courses are where the true spectacle begins. The butcher who supplies these high-end establishments is a man named Ruse, who operates a shop on the boulevard Haussmann. He has cornered the market on a new and exclusive type of meat. He has found the key to the city's last remaining larder of exotic flesh. So, on the menu at Vaux, you will not find beef or lamb. You will find bear chops, roasted camel, antelope terrine, and kangaroo stew. You can order the most sought-after delicacy of the siege elephant. It's a world away from your grim struggle. While you are boiling a rat in a chipped pot, a few streets away, a wealthy diner is debating whether to have the elephant trunk in a piquant sauce or the bear cutlet grilled with pepper. The wine cellars of these restaurants are, of course, still fully stocked. The finest Bordeaux and Burgundy flow freely, helping to wash down the strange and unfamiliar tastes. Historians often point to this as one of the starkest examples of class disparity during the siege. The saying went, if you have a lot of money, you can eat well. The suffering was not evenly distributed. For the poor, hunger was a constant, grinding reality that led to illness and death. For the rich, it was an inconvenience that could be solved with creativity and cash. One of the oddest little bits of culinary history from this time is the fate of the city sparrows. With pigeons and other birds long gone, people turned to hunting the tiny sparrows that lived in the eaves of the buildings. For the poor, a single sparrow might be the only bit of meat they'd see in a week, but in the fine restaurants, they were turned into a delicacy. They were plucked, roasted whole and served on a tiny piece of toast, to be eaten in a single bite. A dish that was a symbol of desperation in one part of the city was a symbol of decadent defiance in another. As you stand outside in the cold, looking at the glowing window of one of these restaurants, the hunger in your stomach is mixed with a new, bitter feeling. It's the cold, hard realization that while all of Paris is trapped in the same cage, you are not all in the same boat. The siege is a shared experience, but the suffering is not. You pull your thin coat tighter around you and walk on, the phantom scent of roasting meat and fine wine following you down the dark, silent street, and you find yourself thinking about the Jardin des Plantes, the city's great zone. You remember the magnificent animals that lived there, symbols of the power and reach of the French Empire. And a terrible logical and inevitable thought begins to dawn. The Jardin des Plantes is not just a zoo. It is a symbol, a living museum of the natural world, and a beloved institution for generations of Parisians. In the warm sunlit days before the siege, you would have come here on a Sunday afternoon. You would have strolled along the manicured paths, admired the exotic plants in the great glass houses, and marveled at the animals. You would have watched the monkeys chatter in their enclosures, seen the graceful glide of the swans on their pond, and stood in awe before the two magnificent elephants, Castor and Pollux. It was a place of wonder, of education, a peaceful escape from the noise of the city. Now, in the depths of the siege winter, you return to the Jardin des Plantes, but not for pleasure. You come here because of the rumors. You come here because it is the last place in Paris where a large quantity of meat is still walking around on four legs. The gardens are almost unrecognizable. The flowers are barren, dug up for any edible roots. The lawns are patchy and frozen. And the atmosphere of cheerful curiosity has been replaced by a grim, predatory silence. You are not the only one here. Other Parisians wander the paths, but they are not looking at the animals with wonder. They are looking at them with a new, unsettling gaze. They are looking at them the way a butcher looks at a cow. It is the gaze of pure, calculating hunger. The animals themselves seem to feel the change. They are listless, underfed. The yoke-sparings, struggling to find food for themselves, have little to offer their charges. The monkeys are thin, the deer listless. The usual sounds of the zoo, the squawks, the roars, the chattering, are muted, replaced by the crunch of your own feet on the frozen gravel. You walk past the antelope enclosure. You see a beautiful, delicate creature with long, spiraling horns. A few months ago, you would have admired its grace. Now, all you can think about is the word venison. You pass the camel pen. The two Bactrian camels, brought all the way from the steppes of Asia, stare back at you with their soulful, long-lashed eyes. You see not a marvel of adaptation to the desert, but a large quantity of roastable meat. This mental shift is the most disturbing part of the experience. The siege has rewired your brain. It has stripped the world of its poetry, its symbolism, its beauty, and replaced it with a single, brutal equation: is it edible? The entire city, and everything in it, is being filtered through this lens. A tree is not a tree, it is not a tree, it is meal. And a zoo, it is a meal. The director of the Jardin des Plantes, a man of science named Henry Milne Edwards, is in an impossible position. He loves these animals. He is their custodian, their protector. He has spent his life studying and caring for them. But he is also a pragmatist. He sees the starving population. He receives official inquiries from the city government. He knows what is coming. For weeks, he resists. He argues that the animals are a national treasure, a living collection that, once destroyed, can never be replaced. He points out that, in purely practical terms, the amount of meat they would provide is relatively small, a mere drop in the ocean for a city of 2 million starving people. It would be a symbolic sacrifice, not a practical solution. Historians still debate his arguments. Was he right? Was the slaughter of the zoo animals a military necessity, or was it a panic, desperate gesture, a piece of political theater to show the public that the government was doing something? The debate continues, but, at the time, his voice was drowned out by the rumbling of empty stomachs. There is a strange and sad detail from this period of debate. Some of the more common animals, like the deer and the antelope, were sold off relatively early, their meat appearing in the high-end butcher shops like that of Monsieur Roux's. But the more exotic and beloved animals were spared for a time. The monkeys were left alone, partly because of their unsettling human-like qualities, and partly because, as one observer noted, they would provide more sentiment than steak. The lions and tigers were also spared, a decision driven by a very practical fear. No one was quite sure how to safely butcher a lion. And the hippopotamus was saved because the public outcry at the thought of eating him was simply too great. He was a celebrity, and his popularity, for a while, was his salvation. But the pressure is building. The winter is deepening. The cold is relentless. And the death toll from malnutrition and disease is climbing steadily. The government needs to make a grand gesture. Standing there, in the cold, quiet gardens, you look towards the largest enclosure, the home of the elephants, castrum pollex. They are the biggest, most meaty residents of the zoo. And you know with a chilling certainty that their time is running out. The official decision when it comes is announced not with a grand proclamation but with a quiet, grim finality. The remaining animals of the jarred in death plants are to be sold to the city's butchers. The scientific and sentimental arguments have been defeated by the simple, brutal logic of the stomach. A consortium of butchers, led by the now infamous Monsieur Rouge, purchases the rights to this menagerie of meat. The process is methodical, almost chillingly bureaucratic. You don't witness the slaughter itself. That happens behind closed doors. A grim business conducted by men who have long since become desensitized to the nature of their work. What you do see is the result, displayed with a surreal flourish in the city's central market. One morning you go to the market, a place you now visit more out of habit than hope. The vast, echoing halls of Les Halles are mostly empty. But a crowd is gathered around one particular stall. It's the stall belonging to Rouge. And on his marble slab, among the familiar carcasses of dogs and cats, are things that simply do not belong there. You see the haunches of an antelope, its slender leg and delicate hoof still attached. You see a slab of dark, coarse meat labeled ours bare. There's a pile of something that looks like venison, but the sign above it reads Cerf de Java, Javon deer. There are kangaroo steaks. It's a butcher's shop imagined by a surrealist painter, a Dolly-esque landscape of displaced creatures. The first of the major zoo animals to be sold are the antelopes and the deer. They are relatively easy to handle and their meat is the most familiar to the Parisian palate. It's a sensation. The wealthy snap it up, eager for a taste of something other than horse or rat. The novelty of it is a powerful attraction. To be able to say we had antelope for dinner last night is a mark of status in this upside-down world, a sign that you are not just surviving the siege, but experiencing it in style. This sale of exotic meat creates a strange new category. People who had never heard of a nilgai, a type of large Asian antelope, are now discussing the best way to roast its flank. The camel meat is apparently tough and stringy, with a strong, game-y flavor that is difficult to mask even with the most pungent sauces. The bear is greasy but rich, highly prized for the layer of fat that still clings to the meat, a precious source of calories in a city starved of it. A particularly bizarre item that appears on the market stalls is porcupine. It's a small detail, but one that captures the sheer strangeness of the time. How does one even begin to butcher a porcupine? The accounts are vague, but the meat was apparently sold and eaten, a testament to the desperate ingenuity of both the butchers and the cooks of the city. The debate over the necessity of this act continues to this day among historians. Some argue it was a purely symbolic act that provided an negligible amount of food while destroying a priceless scientific collection. They point out that the total amount of meat from the entires would have fed the city for less than a single day. Others argue that in the depths of a starving winter, any source of food, no matter how small, was a vital and necessary resource, and that the psychological boost of seeing meat, any meat, in the markets was crucial for morale. The truth, as is so often the case, probably lies somewhere in between. For you, standing in the market, the academic debate is meaningless. The sight of these animals, creatures you once admired for their beauty and wildness, now reduced to priced cuts of meat on a slab, is profoundly disorienting. It feels like the world has been fundamentally broken. The categories that once organized your reality, pet, pest, livestock, wild animal, have all collapsed into one. Everything is just meat. You watch as a well-dressed man purchases a large cut of camel. He hands over a thick wad of banknotes, then the butcher wraps the meat for him in a piece of newspaper. The man walks away, the triumphant look on his face. He has a story to tell now, a grand dinner to host. He has conquered a small piece of the siege. You, on the other hand, turn away with nothing. You have no money for such extravagances. You walk home, the surreal images from the market burned into your mind, and you think about the two animals that are still for now alive in the Jardin des Plantes. The two gentle giants, the elephants Castor and Pollux. And you know with a heavy heart that they are next. The story of Castor and Pollux is not a vague, anonymous tale of the siege. It is one of the most specific, well-documented, and heartbreaking episodes of the entire winter. These were not just elephants. They were celebrated. They had been the undisputed stars of the Jardin des Plantes. Every child in Paris knew their names. They had carried thousands of children on their backs in the sunny, peaceful days before the war. They were gentle, intelligent, and beloved. Castor and Pollux were brothers, acquired by the zoo in the 1852s. They were known for their calm demeanor and the obvious bond they shared. They lived in a large, custom-built rotunda, a grand building that was the centerpiece of the zoo. Their presence was a symbol of Paris itself, big, powerful, a little bit exotic, and fundamentally civilized. As the siege wore on and the other animals began to disappear, the fate of the elephants became a topic of intense public debate. Petitions were signed. Letters were written to the newspapers. People argued that to kill and eat Castor and Pollux would be an act of barbarism, a surrender of the city's soul. It was one thing to eat an anonymous antelope from a distant land, but this was different. This felt like a betrayal. But the logic of hunger once again was relentless. They were by a huge margin. The largest single source of protein left in the city. The official estimate was that they would yield over 2 tons of meat. The government, desperate to show it was taking decisive action, and Monsieur Roux, the butchers, pushed the decision through. On the 29th of December, 1870, the order was given. The execution was not a simple affair. An elephant is not a cow. You cannot simply lead it into an abattoir. The experienced reportedly refused to have anything to do with it. A marksman was hired for the job. He used a custom-made, hardened steel bullet fired from a powerful big-game rifle. The first elephant, accounts differ on whether it was Castor or Pollux, was killed in its enclosure with a single shot to the head. The second, distressed by the sound and the scent of blood, apparently took several shots before it finally fell. The sound of the rifle shots echoed across the silent, frozen gardens, a death knell for the city's innocents. The butchery that followed was a monumental task, taking several days. It was performed by Roux and his team, right there in the rotunda. The public was kept away, but the news spread through the city like wildfire. The beloved elephants were dead, and then their flesh appeared for sale. Roux's butcher shop on the boulevard Haussmann became a grim tourist attraction. People who had no intention of buying anything came just to stare at the spectacle. He displayed the meat with a showman's flair. There were massive roasts, steaks, and sausages, but the most sought after and expensive parts were the trunk and the feet. The trunk, in particular, was considered the ultimate delicacy, sold for an astronomical price to the city's finest restaurant. This event is a classic example of a flashbulb memory for the city. Much like a major historical event in our own time, Parisians who lived through the siege remembered for the rest of their lives exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard that the elephants had been killed. It was a moment when the abstract horror of the siege became incredibly concrete and personal. Historians still debate the symbolic weight of this act. Was it the moment the city truly lost hope? Or was it, in a twisted way, an act of defiant survival, a statement that Parisians would consume their own cherished symbols before they would surrender? The act was so shocking that it even drew comment from outside of France. The famous English writer Thomas Carlyle, hearing the news, is said to have remarked with grim satisfaction that it served the vain and frivolous French right. For you, the news is simply crushing. It feels like a death in the family. The city seems a little darker, a little colder. The memory of a happy, sunny afternoon, riding on the back of a gentle giant, is now tainted with the grim reality of the butcher's slab. The magic of the jarred-in desk plants is gone, replaced by the stock, functional reality of a meat locker. You don't go to see the meat for sale. You don't want to see it. You don't want to see it. You just pull your collar up against the biting wind and hurry home, trying to erase the image from your mind. But you can't. The city has eaten its children's favorite pets, and nothing will ever feel quite the same again. The death of the elephants marks a turning point, the high water mark of the city's surreal culinary adventure. Now, anything seems possible. The psychological floodgates have opened. If Paris can eat its most beloved animals, then nothing is off the table. The weeks that follow become a blur of strange and unfamiliar flavors for those who can afford them. One day, a friend who works in the kitchen of a wealthy household tells you about the latest delivery from the butcher. It's camel. Your friend describes it in detail: the dark, almost purple color of the meat, the thick, fibrous texture. The chef, he says, was at a loss. How do you cook a camel? There are no classic French recipes for such a thing. He ended up treating it like the toughest cut of beef, braising it for hours and hours in red wine, with an entire bottle dedicated to a single large roast. The result, your friend reports with a grimace, was still almost inedibly tough, with a gamey flavor so powerful it clung to the inside of your mouth. It tasted, he says, searching for the right word, like the desert, dry and angry. You hear similar reports about the other exotic meats. The kangaroo is apparently quite tender, similar to venison, and becomes a brief sensation. The wolf, on the other hand, is stringy and has a rank, unpleasant odor. The yak is coarse but flavorful, and the zebra is described as being somewhere between beef and horse. It opens a new world of gastronomic exploration, driven not by curiosity, but by the complete absence of any alternative. These culinary experiments are, of course, a privilege of the rich. For you, the reality is far more mundane and far more desperate. Your diet has narrowed to two primary components, bread and horse meat, when you can get it, and both are becoming increasingly unrecognizable. The horse meat is now mostly sinew and bone. The butchers, in their desperation, are using every last scrap of the animal. You buy a piece of what is labeled boudin, or sausage, but when you cut it open you can see it's made not from meat, but from the horse's blood and offal, mixed with a starchy filler. It has a strong, metallic taste, but it is hot, and it fills your stomach. This brings us to one of the lesser-known but most critical struggles of the siege, the fight against food adulteration. With genuine ingredients disappearing, sellers began to mix their products with anything they could find to add bulk and weight. This wasn't just a matter of poor quality, it was often dangerous. Spices were mixed with brick dust. Coffee was cut with ground-up chicory or even roasted sawdust. Milk was watered down so much it was barely white, but the worst of it was the bread. Bread is the soul of French cuisine, the foundation of every meal. The government, knowing this, made keeping the bakeries open a top priority, but the flour ran out. First, they mixed the wheat flour with rye, then with oats. When that was gone, they turned to stranger things. Rice flour, bean flour, even the ground-up husks and straw from the grain, things normally fed to livestock, were now being milled and baked into loaves for human consumption. The resulting bread was a travesty. It was dark, almost black in color, with a heavy, clay-like texture. It had a sour, unpleasant taste and was notoriously difficult to digest, causing widespread stomach problems. It barely resembled bread at all. You would get your small daily ration, a hard, dense brick of a loaf, and you would have to gnaw on it, your jaw aching with the effort. Historians have analyzed samples of this siege bread, and their findings confirm the anecdotal accounts. They found traces of everything from wood splinters and sand to bits of paper and cloth. The bakers weren't necessarily malicious, they were simply trying to create something, anything, that looked and felt like a loaf of bread, using the refuse of a starving city. Whether this desperate baking did more harm than good is another of the siege's many grim debates. You sit at your small kitchen table, chewing on a piece of this sawdust bread, trying to wash it down with a cup of coffee that tastes like bitter ash. You think about the taste of real bread, the crackle of a fresh baguette, the soft, airy interior. You hear from your friend about the camel roasts and the kangaroo steaks being served in the grand restaurants just a few miles away. The contrast is so stark, so absurd it's almost impossible to comprehend. You are all citizens of the same besieged city, but you are living in different universes defined by the taste, or the memory of taste, of the food on your plate. As the days shorten and the year draws to a close, a perverse sense of anticipation begins to build in the city. It's a feeling that fights against the gnawing hunger and the bone-deep cold. Christmas is coming. In any other year, this would mean streets filled with shoppers, the scent of roasting nuts and mulled wine, the windows of the pâtissiers piled high with festive cakes and chocolates. It would mean a grand family meal, a réveillon, a feast to mark the darkest part of the year. This year, of course, that is all impossible. But Paris, even in its death throes, refuses to abandon its sense of occasion. The city is determined to celebrate Christmas. It will be a celebration of pure defiance, a gesture of normality in a world that has become utterly abnormal. And so the great chefs of the city's finest restaurants prepare for their most challenging service ever. They are artists facing a canvas that is almost completely blank. They have no beef, no butter, no fresh vegetables. What they have is the strange and ghoulish inventory of the city's last living creatures. And with this, they must create a feast. The most famous and enduring artifact from this moment is a menu. It's a single sheet of paper that has become one of the most iconic documents of the siege. It is the Christmas menu for the year 1870 from a restaurant called Voisin, the same place that had been serving Baron Camel. But for Christmas, they have prepared something truly special. The menu is dated 99th day of the siege. You managed to get a look at a copy of it, perhaps passed around in a cafe or reprinted in a newspaper as a curiosity. Reading it is a dizzying, almost hallucinatory experience. It is written in the grand, elegant language of French haute cuisine, but the ingredients it lists are the stuff of nightmares. This menu is not a joke. It is not propaganda. Historians have confirmed that this meal was prepared and served. Diners, dressed in their finest, sat at tables with white linen and polished silver and ate donkeys' heads to drats, washing it down with Premier Crau Burgundy. It is a moment of such profound cognitive dissonance it's difficult to process. It is civilization and barbarism, sitting down to dinner together. For you and for the vast majority of Parisians, Christmas dinner is a very different affair. There is no special ration. Your meal is the same as any other day's, a piece of the black, sawdust bread and, if you are lucky, a small morsel of horse meat sausage. You might have saved a single, precious onion for the occasion, using it to flavor a thin soup made from boiled bones. That is your feast. You huddle with your family in a cold apartment, the windows rattling from the concussion of a distant Prussian cannon. You try to sing a carol, to tell a story, to summon some phantom of Christmas past. But the hunger is a constant, distracting presence. It is a dull, heavy ache in your belly that no amount of defiant cheer can fully erase. You hear the church bells ring, their sound thin and lonely in the frozen air. And you think of the diners at Voisin, raising a glass of Rothschild to toast the 99th day of the siege, perhaps complimenting the chef on the tenderness of his elephant trunk. And the gap between their world and yours feels as wide and as cold as the empty space between the stars. As January arrives, it brings a new kind of enemy, one more relentless and indiscriminate than the Prussian army, the cold. The winter of 1870 to 1871 is one of the coldest on record. The Seine freezes over, a sheet of grey, pock-marked ice. A bitter, Siberian wind whips through the grand open boulevards, finding every crack in the window frames and every gap in your worn-out coat. Fuel has become as precious as food. The city's coal and gas reserves are dwindling, reserved for the military and essential services like the bakeries and the arms factories. For ordinary citizens there is nothing. The gas lights on the streets, the symbol of Paris's modernity, are no longer lit at night. The city of light is plunged into a profound and unsettling darkness, a darkness broken only by the cold, distant light of the moon and the occasional flash of an exploding shell on the horizon. Your world shrinks to a single room. Your family huddles together, wrapped in every blanket, every rug, every spare piece of cloth you own. The beautiful, ornate iron balconies and railings that are the signature of Parisian architecture now become a source of desperate temptation. You see your neighbors under the cover of the new darkness, taking saws and crowbers to the public benches, the park fences, the wooden scaffolding of unfinished buildings. Anything that can burn is being harvested. The magnificent trees that lined the Champs-Élysées and the boulevards, the pride of housemen's New Paris, are systematically felled. You hear the thud of the axe and the groaning crush of the timber all day long. Their bare, frozen stumps stand like tombstones, a memorial to the city's lost beauty. Even the roots are dug up and burned. The city is literal infrastructure to stay warm. This desperate search for fuel leads to some strange and destructive acts. People begin to burn their own furniture. A beautiful mahogany wardrobe, a carved oak dining table, a set of finely upholstered chairs, heirlooms that have been in a family for generations, are broken up and fed into the stove, piece by piece. The sacrifice is immense. It is the burning of your own history, your own identity, for a few precious hours of warmth. One of the most peculiar small-scale industries to emerge during this time is the trade in siege candles. With gaslight gone and regular candles a luxury, people began to improvise. They would take any scrap of fat they could find, a bit of horse grease, the skimming from a bone broth, even the rancid oil from old sardine tins, and melt it down. They would then dangle a piece of string into the grease, let it harden, and create a tiny, sputtering, foul-smelling lamp. It gave off more smoke than light, but it was something, a tiny spark of defiance against the overwhelming dark. Historians see these little grease lamps as a perfect, poignant symbol of the period, a desperate, ingenious, and ultimately pathetic attempt to recreate a lost normality. The combination of extreme cold and severe malnutrition is a deadly one. The death rate in the city triples, then quadruples. It's not just starvation, it's pneumonia, bronchitis, influenza. People's bodies, weakened by months of hunger, have no resistance left. The very old and the very young are the first to go. The daily newspapers, now just single sheets of flimsy paper, are filled with obituary notices. The sound of the funeral cart, the corbillard, becomes as common on the streets as the sound of the baker's boy once was. You feel your own body weakening. You move slowly, conserving every scrap of energy. Climbing the 5 flights of stairs to your apartment leaves you breathless. Your thoughts become slow, syrupy, fixated on the simple, primal needs of the body, a piece of bread, a warm fire. The intellectual and cultural life of the city, the very thing that made Paris Paris, has ground to a halt. The theaters are dark, the libraries are closed, the art galleries are shuttered. There is no energy for auteur philosophy when you are freezing and starving. There is only the science of survival. The grim physics of sawdust bread and the thermodynamics of a splintered chair leg. And you begin to wonder, in the deep, dark, silent hours of the January nights, which will give out first, the city's supply of firewood or your own will to endure. In the midst of the freezing darkness and the gnawing hunger, a new sound begins. It starts on the night of January 5th. It is a high-pitched, whistling shriek, followed by a deafening crash and the sickening tinkle of shattering glass. At first, you think it's just the forts on the edge of the city firing their cannons as they have been for months. But this is different. This is inside the wall. The Prussian army has finally brought up its heavy siege artillery. These are not the small field guns you've been hearing. These are massive, long-range cannons manufactured by the Krupp Steelworks in Germany. They have been painstakingly positioned on the hills surrounding Paris, and now they have begun to speak. The bombardment of Paris has begun. This is a new kind of terror. The hunger, the cold, the darkness, these were passive enemies, a slow, grinding siege of attrition. This is an active, violent, and utterly random assault. The shells fall indiscriminately. They are not aimed at military targets, they are aimed at the city itself. They are aimed at you. Their purpose is purely psychological, to break the will of the civilian population. You learn the new, terrifying physics of a shell. You learn to distinguish its sound as it flies overhead, a noise someone describes as the tearing of a giant piece of calico. You learn that after the crash of impact, there is a moment of silence, and then the sound of debris, bricks, roof tiles, splintered wood, raining back down to the earth. The left bank, the southern part of the city, is the hardest hit. Neighborhoods that were, just months ago, the heart of bohemian and intellectual life are now on the front line. The shells smash through the roofs of apartment buildings, obliterate cafes, and gouge craters in the beautiful Luxembourg gardens. They hit hospitals, churches, and schools. They shelve walls on the Pantheon, the great domed mausoleum where France's national heroes are buried, scattering priceless books into the street. The government's response is to issue bizarrely optimistic and unhelpful advice. Posters appear instructing citizens on what to do during a bombardment. It is best to remain in the middle of a wide street, one suggests, based on the flawed theory that shells are more likely to hit the buildings on either side. Another advises that the safest place in an apartment building is the top floor, under the misguided belief that a shell would punch through the roof and explode in the cellar. The opposite was true. The heavy shells often did exactly that, and the cellars where many people were now sleeping to escape the cold became death traps. The historical consensus is that this official advice was not just useless but mathematically wrong. This period of the siege creates a new kind of social geography. You learn which streets are the most dangerous, which neighborhoods are in the direct line of fire. People begin to migrate across the city, abandoning their homes on the left bank and seeking refuge with friends or relatives on the right bank, which is, for a time, out of the cannon's range. The city becomes a place of internal refugees. One of the strangest small details of the bombardment is how quickly it becomes normalized. After the initial shock and terror, Parisians adapt with a kind of grim, fatalistic humor. They give the shells nicknames, calling them Bismarck's presents. Children, when they hear the whistle of an incoming round, will dive to the ground in a sort of game, shouting "Voilà la boche." The ultimate status symbol becomes owning a piece of shrapnel, a twisted, jagged piece of metal that you can show off to your friends, proof that a shell landed near your home and you survived. Vendors even appear on the streets, selling these fragments as souvenirs, but the dark humor cannot hide the reality. The bombardment adds a constant, vibrating layer of stress to your already miserable existence. You can't sleep. Every distant bang makes you jump. You live with the permanent, low-level anxiety of knowing that at any second, without any warning, a shell could tear through your seed on your mind. It is an attack on your sanity itself, and as you lie awake at night, listening to the random, percussive destruction of your city, you feel your resilience, your famous Parisian elan, beginning to crack. While the city endures its agonies of cold, hunger, and bombardment, another, more ethereal drama is unfolding high above the rooftops. It's a story of balloons and pigeons, a desperate, ingenious, and often heartbreaking attempt to maintain a link to the outside world. From the moment the iron ring closed, the city was a silent island. No letters, no newspapers, no telegraphs. 2 million people had no idea what was happening in the rest of France, and the rest of France had no idea what was happening in Paris. The psychological isolation was as profound as the physical one. The solution came from the world of spectacle and entertainment. Paris had a small community of professional errant hôtesses, men who, in peacetime, would take paying cuss balloons for a thrilling view of the city. Now their frivolous pastime became a vital military technology. The government established a state-run airmail service, the Ballons-Montez or manned balloon. You go to one of the launch sites, perhaps the grand square in front of the Gare du Nord, a massive, billowing sphere of silk, painted with patriotic slogans, strains at its tethers. The factory that produces these balloons is a marvel of improvisation. Seamstresses who once made ball gowns are now stitching together acres of varnished fabric in the repurposed ballrooms of abandoned railway stations. A small wicker basket is attached, carrying the pilot, a sack of mail, and sometimes a high-ranking official or a foreign diplomat who needs to escape. And then there are the pigeons. Crates of homing pigeons are loaded on board, a crucial part of the return journey. The launch is a major public event. A huge crowd gathers to watch, a rare moment of collective hope and excitement. With a great cheer, the ropes are cut, and the balloon rises slowly, majestically, into the winter sky. You watch it drift, a tiny, fragile bubble of hope against the vast, grey canvas of the sky. It is completely at the mercy of the wind. The pilot has no way to steer. He can only go up or down, trying to catch a favorable current. The Prussians, of course, are watching too. They have special anti-balloon guns, the ball on a breaking one, designed to shoot them down. You hold your breath as the balloon drifts over the enemy lines, sometimes drawing a puff of white smoke from a cannon on the ground. This balloon mail service is a subject of much historical fascination. It was the world's first large-scale airmail system. Over 60 balloons were launched during the siege, carrying nearly 10 tons of mail and over 100 passengers out of the city. But it was a one-way trip. The balloons could not fly back against the prevailing wind. So how did news get into Paris? The answer was the pigeons. The pigeons carried out by the balloons would be released in the French countryside, hopefully beyond the German lines with return messages. But these were not normal messages. The science of microphotography, a novelty at the time, was perfected for this purpose. Thousands of letters and official dispatches would be photographic or reduced onto a tiny collodion film, a piece of transparent material no bigger than a postage stamp. One bird could carry dozens of these films, representing tens of thousands of words. Back in Paris, these microfilms would be projected onto a screen with a magic lantern, transcribed by clerks, and then delivered. It was an incredible, almost science fiction system for its time, but it was fraught with peril. Many balloons were shot down or drifted off course, landing in Germany or even in one famous case in Norway. The pigeons faced their own dangers. The winter cold, exhaustion, and Prussian sharpshooters' untrained hunting falcons took a heavy toll. Of the hundreds of pigeons released, only a small fraction ever made it back to their cotes in Paris. For you, this system is a source of both hope and anguish. You write a letter to your family in the countryside. It must be written on the flimsiest, lightest paper imaginable, and the number of words is strictly limited. It is a message of love, of reassurance that you are still alive. You post it, and it is taken to be loaded onto the next balloon. And then you wait. You wait for a reply that may never come. You scan the sky for the sight of a lone pigeon, a tiny speck beating its wings against the wind, carrying a microscopic message of hope from a world you are no longer a part of. It is a fragile, desperate thread, this connection to the outside. And like everything else in the siege, it is a gamble against overwhelming odds. As January drags on, a new kind of exhaustion sets in. It's deeper than physical tiredness. It's a weariness of the soul. The constant, grinding combination of hunger, cold, darkness, and fear has worn down the city's spirit to a raw nerve. The initial bravado of the siege, the patriotic songs and the defiant posters, now seem like artifacts from a distant, naive era. The psychological toll of the siege is immense, a slow-motion collapse of the collective mind. Your thoughts, once occupied with work, art, family, and the thousand small complexities of a normal life, have been completely colonized by the siege. Food is no longer just food, it is an obsession. You spend your waking hours thinking about it, how to get it, how to make the inedible edible. You dream about it at night. You have vivid, technicolor dreams of feasts of war. Crusty bread and roasted chickens, only to wake up to the gnawing emptiness in your stomach and the profound, crushing disappointment of reality. This obsession warps social interactions. Conversations with your neighbors are no longer about politics or local gossip. They are about food. People trade rumors about a shop on the other side of town that supposedly received a shipment of lentils. They exchange recipes for sawdust bread as if they were state secrets. A kind of food paranoia sets in. You eye your neighbors' meager rations with suspicion. Do they have more than you? Are they holding out? The bonds of community, once a source of strength, are strained to the breaking point by the primal instinct of self-preservation. The constant hunger also creates a strange lethargy, a siege stupor. You find it difficult to concentrate. Reading a book is a struggle. The words on the page seem to swim. You move in a kind of daze, your actions slow and deliberate, designed to conserve every precious calorie. Paris, once the most vibrant and energetic city in the world, has become a city of some nebulous cess, of people walking in a waking dream of starvation. Historians who study the diaries and the letters from this period note the profound change in tone over the months. The early entries are full of patriotic fire and confident defiance. The later entries are flat, spare, and almost exclusively concerned with the minutiae of survival. One famous dissect, the writer Edmond de Goncourt, documents this decline with chilling precision. His elegant prose, once dedicated to art criticism and society gossip, becomes a bleak catalogue of the city's decay, a detailed record of the price of a rat and the taste of elephant trunk. One of the most peculiar psychological phenomena of the siege is the spread of spy mania. In a city completely sealed off from the world, paranoia flourishes like mold in a damp cellar. Everyone becomes a potential suspect. A person with a foreign-sounding accent, someone who seems a little too well-fed, someone who keeps to themselves. They could be a Prussian spy, signaling to the enemy from their attic window. Accusations fly, often with little or no evidence. Lynch mobs occasionally form, and innocent people are dragged through the streets, their lives saved only by the intervention of the National Guard. It's a classic symptom of a society under extreme stress. When the real enemy is invisible and overwhelming, people invent smaller, more manageable enemies among themselves. You feel this mental strain in yourself. Your emotions are blunted. The daily reports of deaths from the bombardment or from disease no longer shock you. The sight of a funeral procession no longer moves you. You have become desensitized, your capacity for empathy eroded by the constant, grinding struggle for your own survival. All you have left is a dim, animal instinct to see the next sunrise. In the quiet, frozen moments of the night, you look at your reflection in a darkened window pane. The face that stares back is a stranger's, thin, pale, with dark circles under the eyes. It is the face of a city that is being hollowed out from the inside. The Prussians are besieging the walls of Paris, but the hunger, the cold, and the fear are besieging your mind. And it is this internal siege that feels the most hopeless. By the middle of January, the heroic narrative that Paris has been telling itself for 4 months is beginning to fall apart. The plan, General Trocker's famous plan, has clearly failed. The breakouts have all been bloody disasters. The army in the Loire Valley, the great hope for a relieving force, has been defeated. The balloon and pigeon post brings nothing but bad news from the rest of France. And inside the city, the situation is becoming truly desperate. The death toll is now over 3,000 people a week, mostly from disease and malnutrition. The last of the zoo animals are gone. The sawdust bread is barely edible. The city is on its knees. But there is to be one last, final, desperate roll of the dice. The government knows that it cannot simply surrender. The people of Paris, especially the radical working-class neighborhoods, are still fiercely defiant. They would see a quiet surrender as a betrayal. To justify an armistice, the government feels it must stage one final, spectacular, and utterly hopeless military action. The target is the Palace of Versailles to the west of the city, where the Prussian King Wilhelm I is in residence. In a grand piece of historical irony, the German states have just used the famous Hall of Mirrors at Versailles to officially proclaim the birth of the German Empire. The idea of a French attack on the symbolic heart of the enemy has a certain poetic appeal. The reality, however, is a military nightmare. The attack is planned for January 19th. Nearly 100,000 men of the National Guard and the regular army are massed for the assault. For you, in the city, the preparations are impossible to ignore. For days, columns of troops march through the streets heading west. The mood is not optimistic or triumphant, as it was in the early days. It is somber, fatalistic. The soldiers, many of them ordinary citizens in uniform, are weak from hunger and shivering in the intense cold. Stoic resignation. They know, and everyone knows what this is. It is a blood sacrifice. The battle, which becomes known as the Battle of Buzenval, is a catastrophe. It takes place in a thick, freezing fog that makes any kind of coordinated action impossible. The French troops, poorly equipped and weakened by months of privation, fight with incredible bravery but are mown down by the disciplined, well-fed, and well-entrenched German soldiers. The attack stalls, collapses, and turns into a retreat. The news of the failure filters back into the city not as an official announcement, but in the form of a slow, steady stream of broken men and overloaded ambulance carts. The casualties are horrific. Thousands are killed or wounded for the sake of a political gesture. The public reaction is one of fury and despair. The last glimmer of hope is extinguished. It is now brutally, undeniably clear that there will be no military victory. The siege will not be broken. The sacrifice of the soldiers at Buchenwald was not a heroic last stand, it was a pointless slaughter, designed to manage public opinion. This moment is still fiercely debated by French historians. Was the final sortie a cynical, calculated act of political theatre by a government that had already decided to surrender? Or was it a genuine, if foolishly optimistic, last attempt to change the military situation? Some argue that the government had to demonstrate the impossibility of victory to the radical factions in Paris to avoid a civil war upon surrender. Others claim it was a profound betrayal of the men who were sent out to die. For you, the political debate is secondary to the human tragedy. You see the carts of wounded rumbling over the cobblestones. You see the faces of the women and children searching for their husbands and fathers in the makeshift hospitals that have been set up in theaters and public halls. The raw, tangible grief is overwhelming. The city is saturated with it. The fury boils over. In the working-class neighborhoods, red flags appear. There are riots and a brief, chaotic attempt to overthrow the government. But the city is too tired, too weak, too broken for a full-scale revolution. The uprising sputters out. All that is left is a heavy, bitter silence. The cannons on the ramparts fall quiet. The defiant posters are covered with a layer of grime. The story is over. Everyone knows it. All that is to write the final, humiliating chapter. The end, when it finally comes, arrives not with a bang, but with a profound and unnerving silence. On the 28th of January, 1871, after days of secret and agonizing negotiations, the armistice is signed. A ceasefire is declared. You wake up that morning, and the first thing you notice is the quiet. For weeks, the rhythmic crash of exploding shells has been the soundtrack to your life, a constant, menacing percussion. Now it's gone. The silence it leaves behind is so deep, so complete, it feels unnatural. It presses in on you, heavy and loud in its own way. The war of noise is over. The terms of the armistice are brutal. The city's forts are to be surrendered. The army's weapons are to be handed over, though the National Guard, in a crucial and fateful concession, is allowed to keep its rifles. A massive indemnity payment is to be made to the new German Empire. And Paris, the proud, defiant city, is to remain cut off, a hostage, until a final peace treaty is signed. The iron ring does not open, not yet. The news is met not with relief, but with a stunned, bitter, and humiliated rage. After all the sacrifices, the starvation, the cold, the deaths of loved ones, the eating of pets and elephants, this is the result. Surrender, defeat. For many Parisians, especially those who had embraced the defiant spirit of the siege, it feels like an unforgivable betrayal. The government, they feel, has dishonored the city's suffering. This moment of surrender is a complex one for historians to dissect. On one hand, the military situation was utterly hopeless, and any further resistance would have led only to more pointless deaths from starvation and disease. The government, in this view, made a responsible, pragmatic choice. On the other hand, the way the surrender was handled, with secrecy and a lack of public consultation, bred a deep and lasting mistrust between the people of Paris and their leaders. This mistrust would fester and explode just a few weeks later in the violent, tragic uprising of the Paris Commune. The seeds of that civil war were sown in the bitter soil of this surrender. For you, the political implications are a distant rumble. Your reality is much more immediate. You are still hungry. The armistice has stopped the shells, but it has not brought any food. The government had promised that upon signing the ceasefire, provisions would be immediately allowed into the city. But the logistics are a nightmare. The railways have been torn up, the roads are destroyed. The German army, which is now in control of the supply lines, is in no particular hurry, so Paris waits. The silence is filled with a new, more desperate kind of anxiety. The hope of imminent relief makes the present hunger almost unbearable. You stand in the queues, which are now longer and more hopeless than ever. The bakeries have nothing left to bake with, not even the sawdust and straw. They closed their doors. For a few days there is no bread at all. The city, which has endured so much, seems poised on the edge of a complete and total collapse. A strange apocryphal story from this period tells of a wealthy man who had managed to hoard a single, precious tin of foie gras throughout the entire siege. He had saved it for the day of victory. Upon hearing of the surrender, he is said to have gone to his balcony, opened the tin, and flung it into the street in a gesture of magnificent, nihilistic despair. It's probably not true, but it captures the mood of the city perfectly. A sense of profound, almost theatrical disillusionment. You walk to the city ramparts, the walls you once looked out from with defiant pride. Now you can see German soldiers moving freely in the near distance, setting up their camps, their flags fluttering in the cold wind. There are no more cannon duels, no more rifle fire. Just the quiet, orderly, and deeply humiliating presence of the victor. The siege is over, but the feeling of being a prisoner has never been stronger. You are a citizen of a defeated city, waiting, with the last dregs of your strength, for a piece of bread. The days that follow the armistice are some of the longest and most agonizing of the entire ordeal. The silence of the guns has been replaced by the deafening roar of millions of empty stomachs. The promise of food is in the air, a tantalizing phantom, but the reality has not yet arrived. The city is suspended in a state of purgatory, the war over but the suffering at its peak. Then, one morning, a new rumor spreads through the streets, a rumor so powerful it gets people moving, shuffling out of their cold apartments and towards the city gates. The food is coming. The first convoys have been sighted. They are British and American food trains, organized by international relief efforts, finally given permission by the Germans to enter the city. You join a great, slow-moving river of people heading towards the Porte de Neuilly, one of the western gates of the city. The crowd is silent, almost reverential. Everyone is too weak for cheering. It is a pilgrimage of the starving. As you get closer, you see them, a long line of heavy wagons, pulled by enormous draft horses, creatures the likes of which haven't been seen in Paris for months. They are piled high with sacks of flour, boxes of salted meat, and crates of biscuits. And then you see it. A soldier on one of the wagons reaches into a crate and pulls out a loaf of bread. It is not the small, dark, heavy brick of siege bread. It is a large, round, white loaf. It is a sight so beautiful, so longed for. It feels like a miracle. It is the most perfect object you have ever seen. Some people in the crowd begin to weep, quietly, their shoulders shaking. They are not tears of joy, not yet. They are tears of pure, overwhelming relief, the release of 5 months of coiled-up tension and despair. The distribution is chaotic at first, but slowly, an organized system is put in place. The food is taken to the central markets and then sent out to the local town halls, the mairies, to be given to the people. You stand in one last queue. This one is different. There is no pushing, no desperation. Just a quiet, exhausted patience. You reach the front, and a volunteer hands you your portion, a small sack of white flour, a piece of bacon, some cheese, and a can of condensed milk from America, a strange and wonderful new invention. But most importantly, you are given a loaf of real bread. You carry it home as if it were a holy relic. You don't tear at it in the street. The moment is too significant for that. You get back to your apartment, use it at your table, and you just look at it for a moment. You touch the crisp crust. You breathe in its smell, a scent you had almost forgotten, the warm, comforting, yeasty smell of civilization. Then, you take a knife and cut a slice. The sound of the crust cracking is the most wonderful music you have ever heard. The inside is soft, white, undairy. You take a bite. The sensation is overwhelming. The taste, the texture, the simple, honest flavor of wheat, It's an experience so intense it's almost painful. Your body, so long accustomed to the harsh, abrasive texture of the siege bread, reacts with a kind of shock. It is pure pleasure, pure goodness. It is the taste of a world you thought you had lost forever. In that single bite, the siege is finally truly over. This moment, the arrival of the first food and the taste of the first real bread, is a memory that is seared into the consciousness of every survivor. Historians find countless descriptions of it in diaries and letters. People describe it with an almost religious reverence. The writer Victor Hugo, who endured the entire siege, famously wrote about his joy at seeing the white bread of deliverance. There's a strange but well-documented medical phenomenon that occurred in the days following the arrival of food. Doctors reported a surge in cases of what they called indigestion of joy. People's shrunken, weakened stomachs were simply not prepared for the richness of real food. After months of desperate craving, some who ate too much, too quickly, became violently ill. It was the final, cruel paradox of the siege, to be saved by food, only to be sickened by it. Poignant detail that shows just how profoundly the experience had altered the very biology of the city's inhabitants. Your body itself had to learn how to live again. In the weeks that follow, life begins to seep back into the city, like a slow thaw after a brutal winter. The iron ring of the siege is finally, truly broken. The railway lines are repaired, and the regular rhythm of supply trains and market carts returns. The butcher shops, silent for real meat again, beef, pork, lamb, poultry. The sight of a chicken hanging in a shop window, a completely normal, unremarkable sight just 6 months ago, now looks like an opulent treasure. The city's first act is to eat. Paris indulges in a great, collective, and slightly delirious feast. The restaurants reopen, serving simple, honest food, roasts and stews and mountains of fresh bread, and they are packed. The hunger is gone, but the memory of it, the ghost of it, lingers. You find yourself eating quickly, anxiously, a subconscious fear that the food might be taken away again. You can't bear to see a single crumb wasted. These are the scars of starvation, the habits of survival that will take years to unlearn. As the city air's belly is filled, its other senses begin to reawaken. The gas is turned back on, and one by one, the street lamps are relit. You walk through Paris at night, and for the first time in months, it is once again the city of light. The warm, golden glow feels like a benediction, chasing the deep, oppressive darkness of the siege back into the shadows. The theaters reopen, playing light comedies and frivolous entertainments, anything to distract from the recent trauma. The sound of conversation and laughter returning to the boulevards. But it is a fragile, brittle kind of normality. The city has been deeply wounded, and the evidence is everywhere. The grand avenues are lined with the frozen stumps of the trees that were cut down for firewood. The western and southern neighborhoods are pockmarked with shell craters and dotted with the skeletal remains of burned-out buildings. The Jardin des Plantes is a ghost town, its enclosures empty, a silent memorial to the animals that were sacrificed. And then there are the human ghosts. Over 60,000 civilians died during the siege, not including the military casualties. Almost every family has lost someone, not to a heroic death on the battlefield, but to a slow, anonymous death in a cold apartment from pneumonia or dysentery. The city is a place of quiet, widespread mourning. This strange, liminal period between the end of the siege and the rise of the Paris Commune is a subject of much debate for historians. Was the city's frantic return to pleasure a sign of resilience, or a desperate act of collective denial? Was it a healthy recovery, or the feverish, flushed-cheeked denial of a patient who is not yet out of danger? The trauma of the siege and the deep social and political divisions it exposed, the anger of the working class against the government that surrendered, the stark gap between the rich who dined on elephant and the poor who starved on rats, did not simply disappear with the arrival of food. It went underground, festering. One of the most curious legacies of the siege is its effect on French cuisine. The enforced hypophagi, the eating of horse meat, which began as a desperate necessity, actually stuck around. Butcher shops specializing in viande de chèvre remained a feature of French cities for another century, a permanent echo of that starving winter. The more exotic tastes, of course, vanished. There was no lingering appetite for camel or kangaroo. The bizarre menu of the siege was a culinary chapter that everyone was eager to close. You walk through your city, a city that has been pushed to the absolute limit of its endurance and has, somehow, survived. You look at the faces of your fellow Parisians, and you see the mark of the siege on them, the same mark you know is on your own face. It's a haunted look, a shadow in the eyes that was there before. You have all been part of a vast, terrifying, and surreal experiment. You have learned the taste of things you never thought you would taste. You have learned how thin the veneer of civilization really is, how quickly a city of art and light can be reduced to a primal struggle for a crust of bread. The siege is over. The hunger is gone. But the experience of it, the memory of it, has been baked into the very stones of the city and into the soul of everyone who lived through it. The food has returned, and with it, a semblance of life. But the city is not healed. It is a patient suffering from a profound trauma, now being fed, but still deeply wounded, still haunted by the ghosts of what it has lost. In this fragile state, a new piece of news arrives, a final humiliation delivered as a clause in the preliminary peace treaty. The Germans, as a condition of the final peace, have demanded a victory parade. Not just a parade, but a symbolic, 3-day occupation of the very heart of the city, the Champs-Élysées. The news is received with a collective, silent, seething fury. It is an insult of unimaginable proportions. To have the victorious German army, with their spiked helmets and their brass bands, march down the most famous and beautiful avenue in the world, an avenue that is a symbol of French glory, it is unthinkable. It is like forcing a mourner to host a party in their home while their loved one is still lying in the next room. The city that just a few weeks ago was too weak to even riot now organizes itself with a chilling and unified purpose. This will not be a violent resistance. It will be a protest of profound and utter contempt. The word goes out, spreading through the neighborhoods not by official decree, but by a shared, unspoken understanding. Paris will turn its back. On the morning of March 1st, you awaken to a city transformed. It is a city in mourning. Every shop along the route of the parade is shuttered. The grand hotels have locked their doors. The famous cafes have stacked their chairs and pulled down their blinds. Residents who live in the beautiful apartments overlooking the Champs-Élysées have closed their shutters, creating a canyon of blind, unseeing windows. From many of these windows, and from the rooftops, hang black flags and banners of mourning. You make your way towards the Place de la Concorde, the magnificent square at the end of the avenue. You keep your distance, part of a vast, silent crowd of Parisians all dressed in black, who have come not to watch, but to bear witness to the desecration. The city's great statues in the square, the figures representing the cities of France, have been covered in black crepe. They are veiled, so they do not have to see the shame. It's a gesture of such powerful, theatrical grief that it's almost sublime. Then you hear it, a distant, unfamiliar sound. It's the sound of a German military band, playing a crisp, triumphant Prussian march. The music is alien, it does not belong here. It is an act of auditory violence. And then you see them. 30,000 German soldiers, the victors, marching in perfect, disciplined columns. They are tall, well-fed, and immaculate in their dark blue uniforms. Their polished black boots strike the cobblestones with a single, unified, arrogant rhythm. The sun glints off their bayonets and the iconic spikes of their helmets, the Pickelhauben. You watch them march into a city that refuses to acknowledge their existence. There is no cheering, no booing, no sound at all from the Parisian crowd. Just a vast hostile and absolute silence. It is a silence more damning than any insult. The German soldiers, who expected either the cheers of collaborators or the defeated, are met with a void. They march through a ghost city, an acropolis that has been set for their parade. Historians still debate the decision by the French government, now led by a man named Adolphe Thiers, to allow this parade. Was it a necessary evil, a final concession to get the Germans to sign the treaty and end the wider occupation of France? Or was it a catastrophic political miscalculation, a final spark thrown onto the smouldering embers of Parisian rage that would, in just a few weeks, burst into the flames of the Commune? The consensus leans towards the latter. It was seen by the people of Paris as the ultimate betrayal by their own government. For 3 days, the Germans occupied the small, cordoned-off section of the city. At night, they light bonfires and sing their national songs in the heart of a silent, darkened Paris. And on the 3rd day, they leave. You watch their last columns march away. And then a strange ritual begins. As soon as they are gone, the people of Paris emerge from their silence. They bring out buckets of water and brooms. They begin to scrub the cobblestones of the Champs-Élysées, a symbolic act of purification, washing away the stain of the enemy's presence. The city has been violated, and now it is trying to cleanse itself. But the stain is not just on the stones. It is a stain that water cannot wash away. The humiliation has curdled into a hard, cold resolve. The enemy is gone, but the anger remains, and it is now looking for a new target. The German soldiers march away, but the peace they leave behind is not a real peace. It is a tense, brittle quiet, the silence of a city holding its breath. The enemy you have been fighting for months, the one you starved for, is gone. But in his place, a new and perhaps more dangerous adversary has emerged. Your own government. The national government, now officially based in Versailles, the city of kings, looks at Paris with deep suspicion. They see it as a hotbed of radicalism, a cauldron of revolutionary fever that has been simmering throughout the siege and is now threatening to boil over. The people of Paris, in turn, look at the government in Versailles as a collection of cowards and traitors. They are the men who surrendered to the Germans, who allowed the victory parade, and who now seem more interested in disarming Parisians than in rebuilding France. The crucial point of conflict is the cannon. Specifically, the hundreds of cannons that the National Guard of Paris had purchased themselves, through public subscription, to defend the city. These are not the army's cannons. The people feel they are their cannons. They have become a powerful symbol of the city's independent, defiant spirit. The government in Versailles sees them as a threat, or private arsenal in the hands of a potentially rebellious mob. On the morning of March 18th, you are awakened by a commotion in the streets. It's still dark. You hear the rumble of marching feet, but it's not the sound of the Prussians. It's the sound of French soldiers, regular army troops sent from Versailles. Their mission is to seize the cannons, which have been moved by the National Guard to several high points in the city, most famously to the hill of Montmartre, in the heart of a working-class neighborhood. You join the crowd that is beginning to gather. It's a strange mix of people, National Guardsmen grabbing their rifles, but also women on their way to the morning market, children, old men. There is confusion, then anger. These are our cannons. The soldiers from Versailles are not seen as protectors, they are seen as thieves. The scene on Montmartre becomes one of the most iconic and mythologized moments in French history. The army troops succeed in reaching the cannons, but they have forgotten to bring horses to haul them away. While they wait, the crowd grows larger surrounding the soldiers. It's the women who are at the front, pleading, arguing, remonstrating with the troops. Will you fire on your brothers, they cry. On your own people. The soldiers are young, tired, and demoralized from the war. They are caught between their orders and the faces of the people in front of them. Their commanding officer, a general named Lecomte, orders them to fire. They refuse. He orders them again, his voice cracking with rage. The soldiers hesitate, and then in a spontaneous, historic moment of defiance, they reverse their rifles, but end up a traditional sign of military insubordination. The attempt to seize the cannons has failed. It has backfired spectacularly, and in doing so it has ignited a revolution. The historical debate around this moment is immense. Was it a spontaneous surprising of the people, a genuine expression of popular will, or was it an orchestrated event, cleverly manipulated by radical leaders who had been waiting for just such an opportunity? The truth is likely a messy combination of both. There were certainly organized revolutionaries present, but the energy of the crowd, the anger that had been building for months, was entirely genuine. By the end of the day, the city is in the hands of the National Guard and various revolutionary committees. Two generals, including the unfortunate Lecomte who had ordered his men to fire, are captured and executed by a furious mob. The official government, its authority having completely evaporated, flees the city in a panic, retreating to the safety of Versailles. Paris is now on its own. It is a city without a government. A red flag, the flag of revolution, is hoisted over the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall. You stand in the square, part of a vast, excited, and slightly terrified crowd, and you listen to the speeches proclaiming the birth of something new, something that has never been seen before the Paris Commune. The siege by the Germans is over. A new siege, a siege of Frenchmen against Frenchmen, Paris against Versailles, is about to begin. Lingering aftertaste of the hunger is about to be washed away by the far more bitter taste of civil war. The city you now inhabit is a place of breathtaking paradoxes. For the next 72 days, Paris becomes a giant, chaotic, and exhilarating social experiment. It's a dream, a utopia in the making for some, and a terrifying nightmare for others. The red flag flying over the city hall signals a radical break from the past. You walk through a city that feels both liberated and profoundly tense. The atmosphere is electric. Walls are covered in a fresh blizzard of posters, not proclaiming defiance against the Prussians, but announcing radical new laws. Rents are frozen. The property of the church is seized. Workshops abandoned by their owners who fled to Versailles are to be turned over to the workers. There are plans for free, universal education, for the separation of church and state, for pensions for the widows and orphans of the National Guard. It is a torrent of progressive socialist and even feminist ideas, many of them decades ahead of their time. The streets are alive with political debate. The cafes, which just a few months ago were hubs of grim survival rumors, are now vibrant political clubs, echoing with passionate speeches about the future of humanity. You see women taking on public roles with a confidence that would have been unthinkable before. They are organizing relief efforts, serving as medics, and in some cases, even forming their own military units. A woman named Louise Michel, a schoolteacher and a tireless revolutionary, becomes one of the most famous and inspiring figures of the Commune. But this revolutionary festival is taking place in the shadow of a new ring of steel. The Versailles government, led by Adolphe III, is not just going to let Paris secede. He is methodically gathering a new army, using the tens of thousands of French soldiers who have just been released from German prisoner of war camps. In a final, bitter irony, the German army, still encamped on the northern and eastern heights of the city, becomes a passive observer, watching as Frenchmen prepare to wage war on Frenchmen. Bismarck effectively gives Versailles his blessing to crush the rebellion. The second siege of Paris begins. This time, the shells falling on the city are not German, they are French. The western districts, the same ones that suffered under the Prussian bombardment, are hit once again. The fighting is sporadic at first, a series of skirmishes at the city's edge, but it is vicious, characterized by a brutality that was absent in the more formal conflict with the Germans. Prisoners taken on both sides are often shot out of hand. The historical view of the Commune is deeply polarized. For the political left, it is a heroic, almost sacred moment, the first great proletarian revolution, a blueprint for a future socialist state. They see the communists as martyrs, slaughtered for their noble ideals. For the political right, the Commune was a lawless, atheistic, and terrifying reign of terror, a violent seizure of power by a criminal mob that threatened to destroy the very foundations of civilization. They see its suppression as a painful but necessary act of social hygiene. A strange and often overlooked aspect of the Commune is the sheer artistic energy it unleashed. Many of Paris's most famous artists and writers were involved. The painter Gustave Courbet, a committed socialist, was put in charge of the city's museums. He took measures to protect the art collections of the Louvre from the fighting and headed a federation of artists that called for an end to state control of the arts. It was a moment of incredible creative freedom, happening under the constant threat of annihilation. You see the National Guard marching through the streets again. But now they are not the comically inept citizen soldiers of the first siege. They are hardened, battle-weary, and fighting for a cause they believe in with a ferocious intensity. But they are also disorganized, faction-ridden, and hopelessly outmatched by the professional army being assembled at Versailles. You feel the city's defiant, festive atmosphere beginning to curdle, the hope being replaced by a grim, fatalistic resolve. The dream of a new world is alive, but it is trapped inside a city that is once again surrounded, once again starving, and once again waiting for a final, bloody assault. The final act arrives in the last week of May. It is known to history as Los Mains Sanglante, the Bloody Week. It is a period of such concentrated, savage violence that it leaves a permanent scar on the soul of Paris. On May 21st, the Versailles army finds an undefended section of the city wall. A soldier discovers a gate left unmanned and signals to his commanders. The professional army begins to pour into the city. The street-by-street conquest of Paris begins. What follows is not a battle in the conventional sense. It is a slow, methodical, and brutal extermination. The commanders, hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned, fight with the courage of despair. They build barricades in the streets, just as their revolutionary ancestors had done. These are not the small, hastily assembled barricades of old. They are massive, complex structures of stone furniture and overturned omnibuses, often manned by men, women, and even children. You are now in a city that has become a hell's cape. The air is thick with the black smoke of burning buildings and the constant, deafening rattle of machine guns, the new and terrifyingly efficient mitraille uses. The Versailles troops advance relentlessly, taking one barricade at a time. Their tactic is simple. They avoid direct frontal assaults, instead moving through the buildings themselves, knocking holes in the walls of apartments to advance from house to house, outflanking the defenders and shooting them from behind. Every capture of a barricade is followed by a summary court-martial. Any person found with a weapon in their hands, or even with gunpowder residue on their skin, is immediately executed. They are lined up against the nearest wall and shot. The streets run with blood. As the commune collapses in on itself, it lashes out in a final, nihilistic frenzy of destruction. In a desperate and vengeful act, groups of communers begin to set fire to the city's most iconic buildings, symbols of the state and the church they despise. You watch in horror as flames engulf the Tuileries Palace, the ancient home of French kings. The Hôtel de Ville, the very birthplace of the Commune, is burned to a shell. The Ministry of Finance, the Palace of Justice, all go up in smoke. It is an act of civic suicide, a scorched earth policy of a dying revolution. This act of arson is one of the most controversial and debated aspects of the Commune's fall. The Versailles government used it as propaganda, painting the communers as savage vandals, calling them pet row users, wild-eyed women who supposedly roamed the city with cans of petrol, setting fire to everything. While the arson was real, historical evidence for these roving bands of female fire starters is extremely thin. It was more likely the chaotic, uncoordinated acts of a few desperate groups, but it served to justify the immense brutality of the repression. The fighting reaches its final, tragic climax in the Père Lachaise cemetery, the city's largest necropolis. The last of the communard fighters make their final stand among the tombstones and monuments to the dead. They are cornered, and in a brutal, hand-to-hand struggle, they're all killed or captured. The last 147 survivors are lined up against a wall in the cemetery, now known as the Wall of the Commanders, the mur des Thédores, and shot. The fighting stops, but the killing does not. For days afterward, the army, with the help of vengeful citizens, hunts down anyone suspected of having supported the Commune. Thousands are arrested. Makeshift prisons are set up in the city's parks and theaters. Thousands more are executed without trial in the parks and squares. You survive by hiding, by staying invisible, by erasing any sign that you may have sympathized with the dream of a new world. You see your neighbors dragged from their homes. You hear the sound of the firing squads, a constant, popping sound that echoes through the streets day and night. The city that ate its zoo is now eating its own children. The violence is on a scale that dwarfs anything seen during the German siege. The Bloody Week is a wound from which Paris will not recover for generations. The guns finally fall silent. The last fires are extinguished, leaving behind the blackened, hollowed-out shells of the city's grandest buildings. A strange, smoky, and deeply sorrowful quiet settles over Paris. The dream of the commune is over, drowned in blood. The siege, in all its forms, is finally, truly, finished. You step out into the streets of your city, a city that is almost unrecognizable from the one you knew less than a year ago. It is a city of ghosts. The human cost is staggering. While the German siege killed tens of thousands through disease and starvation, the bloody we killed them with bullets. The exact numbers are still a matter of intense historical debate, a testament to the chaos of the killing. Estimates of the number of Parisians executed by the Versailles government range from a conservative 10,000 to a shocking 30,000. It was one of the most brutal episodes of state violence in modern European history. The repression continues long after the shooting stops. Tens of thousands are arrested and put on trial. Thousands are sentenced to long prison terms. Thousands more, including the famous revolutionary Louis Michel, are deported to the penal colonies in the South Pacific, a sentence that was often a slow-motion death penalty. You walk past the wall of the Communards in the Père Lachaise cemetery. It is just a simple stone wall, pockmarked with bullet holes. But it has already become something more. It is a shrine, a place of pilgrimage for those who remember the dream. You see a single red flower, left by an anonymous mourner, a tiny speck of color against the grim grey stone. The city you are left with is a city deeply divided, haunted by a trauma that it cannot speak of. The new, conservative Third Republic builds its foundations on the graves of the Communards. To celebrate the victory of order over chaos, and to atone for the sins of the Commune, the government decides to build a new, magnificent church on the highest point in the city, the hill of Montmartre, the very place where the uprising began. It will be the Basilica of the Sacre-Cœur, the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. For some, its gleaming white domes are a symbol of national reconciliation and divine forgiveness. For others, it is a monument of triumph, built in stone and gilt, a constant reminder of the crushed revolution that lies buried beneath it. Its meaning, like the memory of the commune itself, depends entirely on which side of the barricade you were on. You think back to that day in August, so long ago, sitting at that cafe on the Grand Boulevard. You remember the feeling of blissful ignorance, the unshakable confidence in the permanence of your world. It seems like a memory from a different person's life. That world is gone, burned down, and buried. You have lived through a time when the impossible became normal. You have seen a modern, civilized city descend into a state of primitive survival. You have learned the taste of horse, of cat, of rat, of elephant. You have felt the slow, grinding agony of starvation in the sharp, random terror of an artillery shell. You have witnessed the ecstatic birth of a revolutionary dream and its brutal, bloody death. The journey was never really about the strange and horrifying menus. The exotic meat was just a symptom of a deeper malady. The real story was about the breaking down of a world. It was about the stripping away of certainty, of humanity itself, until only the bare, desperate instinct to survive remained. You are a citizen of a city that ate itself and was then reborn, and you will never, for the rest of your life, take a simple loaf of bread for granted again. And so, our story of that long, dark winter in Paris comes to a gentle close. The sounds of the city, the cannons, the cries, the whispers, they all begin to fade now. They recede into the quiet distance of the past, becoming just a soft, muffled echo. You can feel the weight of that history begin to lift from your shoulders, leaving behind only a deep sense of stillness. You are no longer in that cold, hungry city. You are here, in your own comfortable space, warm and safe. The shadows in your room are just shadows, and the only hunger is a gentle hunger for rest, for the peaceful release of a deepened and troubled sleep. You can let the story go now, like a balloon drifting away into the night sky, its journey complete. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.